Hello everyone, Matt the Lester here. We're back with another episode of our Terra Mystica Fan Factions Basic Strategy Series, where we are going through all of the new fan factions currently in beta testing on Board Game Arena and soon to be released as an official expansion for Terra Mystica, and talking about how to play these factions, when to play these factions, some basic overviews. So if you are familiar with the game of Terra Mystica, you've played some of the base factions, you're familiar with the rules, but you're looking to get into this expansion for the first time, try out some of these factions, these videos are for you. We are most of the way through the series already. This is episode 12, and today we will be diving into the second green faction, the Chash Dallah, or Chash Dallah, as people were talking about them, as they are a very coin-focused faction, or at least that was their original intent. We'll see if that's actually the case. But I often call them the Parrots because, as you can see by this beautiful artwork, they're envisioned as this wise old parrot with a cane. And so if I refer to them in this video as the Parrots, it's the same thing. Chash Dallah, Parrots. Chash Dallah is kind of a mouthful. So anyways, we're going to dive into the Parrots today. As all of you know, I don't do video editing. I don't do animations. This is very basic stuff here. So this will be the no frills, one take, basic fan faction overview of the Chash Dallah Parrots, whatever you want to call them. All right, let's go. So first thing to see, and maybe the most important thing about the Chash Dallah, is they are a green faction. We will talk about how important this is for them over the course of this series, but let's take a look at their board. So starting with their production, in the lower left-hand corner, we see, unlike some of the fan factions, which have had holes and weirdness and all this different stuff, we've got a nice, simple, straightforward, back-to-basics board with the Parrots here. Normal worker production, mostly normal coin production, a couple extra coins on the higher TPs, but that's not anything we haven't seen in Terra Mystica before. Normal priest production, normal sanctuary, and we've got this 4-coin stronghold, which is actually unique. I don't think there are any other 4-coin strongholds, but strongholds that just produce coins are also something that we're relatively familiar with in Terra Mystica. So nothing too crazy here. Looking at the power bulls, similar situation, normal, 5, 7, sort of the standard power starting. So nothing crazy like we've seen with some of these other guys. Come over here. We do see a big difference up here on their digging area in that the Chash Dallah are not able to advance their digging. They just have 3 workers to a spade, and that's it. They have normal starting resources, cold steps on earth and air, normal shipping, and then their book ability is something that is unique, as all the book abilities are. The Chash Dallah have an income track, and so this track is just like the shipping track, or for most factions, the digging track. The digging track obviously not existent for the Parrots, but similar to the shipping track, where you can pay resources, in this case 2 workers and 2 coins. You start with your extra peg, the one you would normally put on the digging track, and you can move it up each one, and this income track, every step that you move up gives you cumulatively more income. So say you pay 2 workers and 2 coins, you move your peg up 1 spot, and then every subsequent beginning of a round, the next round, so say you do it in round 1, starting in round 2, and every round after that, you get an extra worker income. Then you do it again, and you get an extra 2 coin income. And then you do it again, and you get an extra worker. And these are cumulative. So if you do all 4 steps on the income track, every round after you get to that point, you will generate 2 extra workers and 4 extra coins. Pretty nice, extra resources. You also get some victory points, just like the other tracks that you advance on. So in this case, you get 1, 2, 3, and 4 victory points for every subsequent step that you're able to go up on the income track. So this is a pretty interesting, unique ability. We'll talk about its power in a little bit, but this is one of the 2 things that makes the Parrots who they are. The other big thing is their stronghold ability, which is really where the name comes from of Chash Dallah, which is that after they've built their stronghold, the Parrots can use coins instead of power to take a power action. So say, for example, they want to take double dig, instead of having to have 6 power in bowl 3 or being able to burn such and being able to then move it down to bowl 1, they can simply spend 6 coins and take that action instead. Resource-wise, this is neutral action, right? You can always turn a power in bowl 3 into a coin by moving it to bowl 1. So spending coins equal that you already have equal to power is you're actually spending the exact same amount of resources. So that actually makes this a kind of weak stronghold in the fact that compared to most other strongholds, which give some sort of resource creation or economy boost, this doesn't actually generate anything. It just gives you a lot of flexibility into using power actions. The 4 coins is stronger than most strongholds from a production standpoint. You know, most strongholds are either 2 power or 4 power, and 4 coins is strictly better than that. But you lose the, you know, compared to someone like the giants or the nomads who give you spades, or the witches who give you free dwellings, like this doesn't actually generate anything unlike all of those ones. So there's kind of your point of comparison. So now that we know what the parrots do, let's talk a little bit about when we might want to play them. And this is when we start needing to talk about sort of how do you play this faction, because the real thing about this faction, as you see, the board is very basic and it's very simple, and the parrots play similar to actually how some people complain about their fellow green faction, the Orin, kind of like a vanilla faction in a lot of ways. Their special abilities are not so strong or so unique that they really change the way you want to play the faction. This is really about kind of playing back to basics Terra Mystica, and the biggest advantage that the parrots have is that they are green. Most maps, Lakes is kind of the exception, but most maps give a lot of inherent advantages to green because the factions that are green otherwise don't have strong power. So the parrots do kind of fit this particular mold, and what you really want to do with the parrots is just expand, be super efficient with how you grow, and score a lot on the track. And so when we're looking at setups that are good for the parrots, really it's just what setups are good for green. So we always say it, the color wheel matters a lot. Brown is a good color neighbor, and in particular on base map, gray is awful. If gray is in the game and you are playing pick factions, run away. Absolutely would be, is just really, really nasty. That battle, well understood on base map. You just do not want to deal with that. Similarly to some of the other green factions with the parrots, Temp Ship is a really nice bonus tile because it allows you to do a dwelling rush or generally just to expand around. There's a lot of hexes you can get to with 1 or 2 shipping as any green faction, and that includes the parrots. They also like, because to get a lot of dwellings out early and generate a lot of workers, dwelling scoring is really nice. And then because the parrots cannot advance their digging, the single spade often comes really in handy too, although of course a lot of factions like that. I have worker power here listed as like the bad bonus tile, and it's not so much that that tile in particular is bad for them, it's just kind of like relatively the worst. You know, the parrots don't have a ton of inherent scoring. They have a few points they can pick up on that income track on their board, but for the most part they need to find points from favorite tiles, round scoring, and bonus tiles, and so worker power doesn't have that. And they also like coins in the game because if they do build their stronghold, the more coins they can generate, they can better use that ability. So worker power is kind of like the odd man out, as doesn't fit those, plus also isn't Temp Ship, which is really good. So that's kind of the only reason that I have it over there. They're also pretty flexible in terms of what setups they can play. I only have a couple things over here on the bad side, like, you know, because they can't advance their digging, round 4 spade rounds are just going to be better used by other factions. Round 2 and 3 town rounds, they to sort of spread more as a green faction rather than build up around them. Plus also as a 5-7 faction, they're probably not getting double dig in round 1 in most games, so getting a town in round 2 particularly is kind of tricky for them. And then on the other side, they just want high scoring tracks to make up those points. Early dwelling rounds are really, really nice to enable. I mean, you can do a dwelling rush, and you should probably consider it with the parrots, even if there isn't round 1 dwelling scoring, but particularly if there is. Or if there's round 2 dwelling scoring, maybe you build a temple and then you kind of spread out. And also high scoring tiles, dwellings, and TPs at the end of the game, also very good for the parrots. But really what you want to do with them is just be flexible and try to follow the track and find as many points along the way as much as you can. Let's talk about the map. Also pretty standard green stuff here. So F4, almost always going to start there, right in the center. High likelihood of neighbors. Another reason why brown is good, we highlighted them on the prior slide, is they almost are always going to start on e6, and so that's a guaranteed neighbor with whom you're not fighting over hexes. Obviously, this is why this is well known, but this is why gray is bad, is that, you know, if they start on e7, one of your main avenues of expansion is done. If you can get this center stretches the Parrots, this is like the one way they can potentially get an early town. That can be really nice. And then which other spot you start on usually depends on who your neighbors are in the game. E9, I think, is the default, probably the best spot most of the time. C3 or C4 are really if you're worried about losing those spots. Like say you have a blue faction in the game, then you might consider C3, or if that blue faction is mermaids, you might consider C4, so as not to lose this, because you really want to have access to this C3, C4, C5, A10, E9, one shipping window where you get access to 5 hexes with just a single dig on C5, which is how you do the dwelling rush. So that's a particularly nice area for the Chash Dallah, and they really want to keep this open for them and not let that get taken over by anybody else. But again, this is pretty standard green faction placement for the Parrots here. Let's talk about the openings, and this is where a little bit where we should talk about the income track. So the value of the income track is, in their current iteration, unfortunately a little bit weak. So the Chash were nerfed after the first time they came out, and the two major changes was their stronghold used to be 6 coins, and the income track used to have both a 2-coin base income and a 1 more point on each step of the income track. The stronghold coin reduction and the removal of the inherent income track base income of 2 coins kind of went together to make the stronghold a lot weaker, and in its current format, I would argue, is really only worth building when you're going to score it. It used to be in the early iterations of the Parrots, and it's possible that they revert to some of this if they prove to be weak in the most recent data, that the stronghold was good enough and you had enough coins and you could really use that power then of using you had a lot of leftover coins and you could use those coins to take power actions. That whole ability worked together really well, and it actually proved to be a little bit too strong because of all the inherent advantages that they have as green also. But by reducing these coins, the math doesn't work out so well, right? So think about it this way, like you're sitting on a TP after your first upgrade and you're considering, do I want to build a stronghold or do I want to build a temple? In the current format now, you build a stronghold and you spend 4 workers and 6 coins, and all of a sudden now you're generating 4 coins of income. And then you have this flexibility, but not as many coins to actually use that ability to take power actions, and your coins are going to be a little bit tighter than it was before. Versus, you can build a temple for 2 fewer workers and 1 fewer coin, and for example, take Fire 1, which now you're generating 3 coins of income, which is only 1 coin worse, plus a priest, and priests are absolutely amazing. The stronghold just doesn't hold up compared to other options nearly as well in this current iteration of the Parrots. So what you need to build the stronghold, and we'll actually start on the right side of this opening slide here, is either a stronghold scoring or the big building scoring tile, or maybe even better, both, in which case all those extra points that you're generating can kind of tip it back in your favor, especially with an opening. Now, later in the game, mid-game, round 3, round 4, stronghold round, you already have a temple up. That's probably in this current format of the Parrots when it makes most sense. Build the stronghold. Honestly, if you're going to build it at all, it's still an expensive building. 4 coin income is quite nice, so once you get that thing up and going. But unless there's also a lot of other coins in the game, maybe you already took Fire 1, maybe you've actually advanced your income track and you're generating a lot of coins, and you're probably not going to use that ability that much, or it's not going to prove that extra beneficial to you, because again, it doesn't actually generate any resources or economy or help your snowball or anything like that. It's really only useful if you're like not getting any leech for some reason, and you really want to steal a power action like a double dig, which is something the Parrots want frequently, is double dig. So that's kind of the main thing it's useful for. But again, if you don't have a lot of extra coins, play more efficiently is kind of what I would say to that. And then the income track, right? So actually, start the rest of the income track is now with only 10 points to be had in the income track instead of 14. It's pretty dicey again as to whether or not advancing on the income track is really worth it. Like, you spend 2 workers and 2 coins for a step, and that step is either going to give you 1 worker every round or 2 coins every round. So even if you do that in round 1, the return is just like not that high. I'm not saying that you should never do it, but I've seen people in the current iteration of the Parrots play really well with advancing the income track, with not advancing the income track, with kind of doing it gradually, with doing it all at once. It's maybe that means it's well balanced, but I feel like for an inherent ability, it should be a little bit more beneficial or a little bit more appealing, because right now I feel like it's kind of like you can do it or you can not do it, but even if you do it, it's not like that great. And so that's kind of the thing. I think the other issue is because it costs 2 workers per step, workers are what you're tight on at the beginning of the game, particularly in round 1 and sometimes in round 2 also. And so you're making trade-offs about advancing on that track versus building more dwellings or versus building temples and TPs. And usually you'd rather do the latter stuff, build more structures. But maybe if in the middle of the game you find yourself with an excess of workers, that's when the income track starts to become interesting. So you'll see here when I've listed out the openings, an opening that actually I guess I probably should say is like an option is just to do a bunch of advances on the income track. But I think that in almost all cases, that's a pretty inferior opening to getting more structures or upgrading down on the board. And I would focus on that income track more in the mid game if you're going to do it at all. So anyways, stronghold opening, we started there. You really want to do it if you have the big building tile and or it's stronghold scoring. And then what you're trying to do in this situation really is get your stronghold up as quickly as possible and then take basically whatever power action is left available to you. If you can, especially if you have the big building tile, if you can find a spade, you're probably not getting double dig, but if you can even get single dig, that can still be pretty good. Or take workers, coins, priests, send them to cults for rewards, maybe do a step on the income track. It kind of just depends on what's going to be left available to you. Flipping to the other side, the Dwelling Rush, as I would say for any green faction, I think is the strongest opening if you can pull it off. You need shipping and you need a spade, right, on base map, and you got to dig that gray. So you can either do that by taking the spade tile and then taking the priest action. You can get temp ship, in which case you only need a spade bonus action, or you can take the priest tile and then you have to advance your ship manually and then find a spade power action also. But if you do that, you can usually get out 6 or 7 dwellings. One thing that is nice with Chash in the income track here is if you lose one of your hexes, C3 being the one that most likely will get sniped by somebody, often a blue faction or maybe giants, you still have, if you just are only able to build 4 new dwellings, so you have 6 total, you still have 2 workers left that you can do 1 step on the income track, which actually gives you that same worker income that the 7th dwelling would give you. Now it's not as good because you don't have the dwelling down and you've also spent 1 more worker to do it, but as far as the trade-off goes, it can work. Also, I would, under the Dwelling Rush umbrella here, I would consider there's also the TP plus 5 dwellings or TP plus 4 dwellings opening, which can also work very well, especially if you're rolling into like a round 2 temp round, run 2 but big building round to build a stronghold. Want to have that TP up, have a couple extra coins instead of an extra worker. Or maybe you don't quite have the hexes that you have access to. So, but those fall in the Dwelling Rush. And in general, that's a really strong opening, particularly because the Parrots can use all those workers really, really well, maybe even better than other green factions. They generate a whole bunch of workers. They can do 3 worker digs, which remember is their, they can't advance their digging, or they can use those workers to advance on the income track. They just have, with that income track, they have a lot more capacity to spend workers than a lot of factions. So Dwelling Rush is, it's usually good because it's a very strong economic opening in general, but add on top of that you can actually pretty efficiently use those workers, and it's really, really good for them. If you can't get a Dwelling Rush, you could also go for a pretty standard temple plus some number of dwellings opening, 1 or 2 usually, depending on how many spades you can find. You can do this with almost any tile. If you get temp ship, but maybe you don't get a spade, you have those couple greens you can do, and you can do temple 2 dwellings without needing any spades. You get the spade tile, obviously that's nice. You can secure a key hex. Maybe it's just temple plus 1 dwelling, or maybe you get spade plus single dig. This is sort of the standard slew of openings that many factions in Terra Mystica find appealing, and is a perfectly fine opening for the Parrots to pursue here. Sometimes also here you can add an income track step. Maybe you got the big building tile and you have an extra couple of workers sitting around, or maybe you get the workers action as the only power action that was available to you when you got the leech to take one. You can take those workers, and instead of, like, for example, building a second TP and ending on that really ugly temple TP dwelling opening, which I really am not a fan of, instead temple 3 dwellings, or temple even 2 dwellings, and then also a step on the income track to start progressing on there makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of the opening set. Is, again, a lot of normal stuff here with green and with factions in general. This is just a pretty standard faction that you really just want to be efficient and do what you think is best. And that's kind of, when I talk about, okay, where are we going from here with the Parrots? This first point I got, like, take what you can get, right? Forcing things with a faction that is a little bit underpowered and doesn't have any, like, particular niche that's really strong to go after is going to be your most efficient way and best way to play them. So if your opponents give you double dig, great, take it. If they give you an early pass for double dig in round 2, take that. Like, just don't overspend resources pursuing one particular line, because there's no particular line that's so strong for them that it's worth being inefficient to go for it, I think is really the theme that I'm trying to get at here. The income track, we talked about this a little bit too. Also, like, most other things you can do with those resources are probably better, maybe with the exception of building TPs. But if you have extra resources sitting around, that's great, because then you can do something with them instead of nothing. Sometimes it's a useful stall move, right? You want to wait one turn so you can get that bonus tile that you want, and instead of having to do something inefficient like a 3-worker dig before you can build a dwelling or something weird like that, you can just one step on the income track, get a little points, get a little more income. Because once you do get to the top, that extra 2 workers and 4 coins every round is actually quite powerful. It's just very expensive to get there. But if you're not doing anything else with those resources, that's awesome then. Again, mention the workers, but you really just can't have too many of these guys. They will build up, and you will be able to spend them, especially if you open with a lot of dwellings. So whether it's a dwelling rush in round 2, or a more standard opening and putting out a bunch of dwellings dwelling rush in round 1, or whether it's opening with a standard like temple opening and a bunch of dwellings round 2, round 3, you'll find ways to spend those workers between the hard digs and the income track. Another point that I didn't put on here is maybe sort of obvious, is because they don't have inherent scoring. Scoring favors are very important for the Parrots. Not so much that I would say you need to, like, open with Earth 1 or something like that. I think if you open Temple, I would still open with an Econ favor. Fire 1 is actually probably the best case in the best option in most scenarios. Potentially Air 2 also, if you don't plan on building the stronghold, and so you actually need power to take double dig a couple times over the course of the game. But those are probably the 2 that makes the most sense. If you are able to spread out a bunch of dwellings, you should generate a lot of workers. And so even despite point number 3 here, that you can never have enough workers, I don't think Earth 2 is often the right one for the Parrots. And then finally with the stronghold, a little nuance here. Once you've built it, it actually is always better to use the coins than power that you have, because that keeps your power more advanced and can get you more efficient leeches. So basically, if you're going to be able to take multiple power actions, start with the coins, and then later you can either down convert power when you need the coins to make up the ones you just spent, or maybe you'll be able to spend another power action and you can do it then once you don't have enough coins left. But you're better off doing it just because the power can become coins, but the coins can't become power, so you want to use the coins first. Overall, if this wasn't clear, I think these guys are kind of weak, especially in their current faction. Now, if they give them the way they're set up, if they give them some of their previous nerfs back, they could become powerful again. It's amazing how you take away like a couple little things, and these guys went from being one of the stronger fan factions in the early, right after their initial release, to now almost, maybe the weakest or one of the weakest. But we'll see what they do. I don't think they're completely uncompetitive. I think they're playable, especially in the right setup. High scoring track dwelling rounds early, and if you know color neighbors, right? Like, if you can get all those kind of things, they can still be very competitive. But compared particularly to some of the strong fan factions we've seen, like their color partners, the Enlightened or the Treasurers, they're just a much weaker faction. Network average, right? As most I'd say is kind of typical of green. Like, if you can get their economy going and they don't have color neighbors and they get the hexes they want, they can certainly be competitive on network, but they're not going to blow out every single game. Colts low, maybe this is like medium minus. Again, they just they don't have any natural cult powers, so everything they're going on the Colts is manual, putting priest down, favor tiles, etc. So can they play culty? Certainly, but is it something that they're gonna go after in a lot of games? Probably not. They do start with air and earth, which are two of the better cults. So if they do get a priest tile in round one and there's a round one cult reward and they can do it and they can kind of snowball that, sure, can they play culty? Certainly, but I wouldn't call them a particularly culty faction in general. So again, this means maybe not the highest of end game scoring, so you really got to find points along the way if you want to have a successful game with the Parrots. But all of that said, they're still a very cool faction. I absolutely love the artwork. I think the income track is a really good idea. I hope that by the time you are playing the official printed board set, there might have been a couple tweaks to them to make them a little bit stronger relative to their fellow fan factions. But even if not, you should definitely still try them out. I promise you'll have a fun game. And that'll be it for today. There are 2 episodes left. We've got the Goblins and we've got the Goats. 2 amazing factions. So stay tuned for those soon. And until then, come find me on BGA. Tell me in the comments how your games with the Parrots have gone. Are you guys seeing some magical way to play them that I'm not seeing? It's definitely possible. So please let me know, because this is one of the factions that I've just had a hard time being successful with. So really looking forward to see what all of you come up with. Okay, until then, see y'all later.